From the studios of the Pemberton Township Board of Education's Channel 14, it's time to find out what's cooking. Here now is the head of the Food Services Department at Pemberton Township High School and your host, Tim Paroli.
Hello, welcome once again to What's Cooking. I'm Tim Paroli, and today we're going to show you how to make stuffed pork chops. Pork chops are an item that we either have on the grill outside at a barbecue, usually overdone. Sometimes we have them at home, pan-fried, and it's so much of a mess that a lot of us have given up trying to make them at home. A stuffed pork chop on a restaurant or diner menu is still a very popular item. That tells me that you folks at home are afraid to try it. After today's program, you're going to be able to make them like a pro. The main thing you want to remember when you're buying pork chops is order a double-wide pork chop. Pork chops normally are sliced 1 or 2 for each backbone vertebrae, and that's how we get the size of a pork chop, which is 3/4 to an inch wide. However, if you order a double-wide pork chop or a pork chop that's going to be used for stuffing, they're going to be about this wide. And they can go anywhere from this size up to another 1/2 inch larger than this. And a nice fat pork chop, which still has the backbone on it, is going to be very easy for you to start with. You don't want to try a boneless chop. You want one that has been exactly how it got its name. It has been chopped off of the rest of the loin. So it's going to have the backbone in it like this one has right in there. And that's what you want to start. Now we have to make sure that you can identify a couple of parts on this pork chop. When you first purchase a pork chop, naturally you're going to take a look at it. And when you do, there are 2 types. Pork chops that come from the loin end will usually have a small piece of meat attached to it on the T part of the bone, like these 2 have. These are loin pork chops. Now that tells you that these are going to be more tender than the other pork chop. So if you're looking for something that's more tender, make sure it's got this little piece of meat hanging on the side. That's the pork tenderloin right there. That lets you know that these are loin chops. Even though they can be center cut, there still are loin and shoulder chops, and these are the loin chops. And again, they have that backbone in them right here on the side, how it would look. And if we stand it up, you can see it's a flat bone, just the way I've shown you here. And that is very nice. It's going to be a guide for you when you cut these so that you'll know what you're doing. You can't mess them up. So with that in mind, the first thing we're going to do is show you how to make them for stuffing. First of all, you're going to need a knife that is used for butchering and taking bones out of meats. They're called a boning knife. It's about 7 to 8 inches in length. Sometimes the blades are curved, sometimes they're straight, and some of them are flexible, others are not. That is all personal preference. All you need to know is that you need a sharp, pointed knife like this. A fillet knife, a fish knife will do very well also. Now we're going to take the chop, and this section here is called the eye of the chop. And that is the section of meat that we're going to stuff. This portion right here and here. Now what we're going to do, I'll move one out of the way, is we're going to go where this bone is. And we're going to go right next to it, right where I've put my hand. And we're going to split this meat in half, but we're not going to cut it. We're not going to cut it. If you cut this, you need toothpicks. And you know how lazy I'm getting. We're going to do this without that. So I keep my hand on the top of the bone, and I'm going to cut away from myself. So if I ruin anything on TV here, it'll be just the pork chop. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to insert the knife like this, and then I'm going to cut down till I hit this bone, and I'm going to bring the knife out just like that, what I've shown you, except the knife is going halfway in the depth of the pork chop. So we're going to insert the knife just like this, and I'm watching the outside edge of the pork chop here. So I know the knife is going to just about come out. Once I have the knife down there, and there's the point right there, all the way to the bottom, now I'm going to cut in with the knife. And remember, I have this bone here, this little T-bone. So I'm going into that, and now I'm coming back out with the knife, keeping my hand on the top, and we just pull the knife out. Now that should leave a hole that's about the size of a quarter, and we make sure that we can fit in there. Now, if that's not cut all the way, we can just widen that pocket just a little bit. So what we have in here now is a pocket, and we've cut that pocket in the eye of the pork chop, all right? Now I'm going to show you that one more time so that you get an idea on how to do this, because they are very simple. remember a very sharp knife, okay? Now we're going to review for you. The knife goes in along this eye, this round piece of the meat, just like this, down, up against that bone, and back out. And what we have done, have cut a nice pocket in. I'm going to give you a good view. Let me get all the stuffing stuff out of the way. All right? So what I'm going to do is we're going to go right in here. Here's the bone I've told you about. Boy, after seeing this, you'll be able to do this with no problem. And it's going to go in just like that. So I'm going to move over here so I'm out of your way, and you can see what I'm doing. There goes the knife, right on in. And we're going to just stick that chop all the way. So we've got that stuck right on the chop. Now I'm going in till I go toward the bone, and I keep my hand right on top like this, and we just pull the knife out like that. You can see why when that knife flicks away. Then we're going to just turn this over and make sure that the pocket is big enough, and that pocket feels good. I use the back of the knife to check the pocket so that I don't recut the pork chop. So now I've got those two guys all ready to stuff. Now we're going to put some stuffing together. And all we want to do for that is I'm going to make a very easy and quick bread stuffing. Now, a lot of people, when they want to make a stuffing, the first thing they do is get a list of ingredients 1.5 miles long, and they put all kinds of things in the stuffing. And that's great if you're going to make the kind of a dressing more than a stuffing. If you're going to stuff this into a meat like we're going to today, it's going to be surrounded by the pork, and that's going to give it all the flavor it needs. And it doesn't need any eggs in it because it's stuffed inside the pork chop, so it's not going to go anywhere. So we don't have to worry about the dressing, the stuffing, needing any extra flavor. It's surrounded by the pork chop, and we don't have to need that to hold together because it's wrapped inside the pork chop itself. So a couple of rolls that are not too fresh, a hard roll, anything, even bread, any kind of bread will do fine. We just make our long cuts on that, and what we want to do now is cut this nice and small. That's one thing I want you to do because the size of the hole on the pork chop is not that big. So we just cut this bread up nice and small. All right, now I'm cutting them real long and thin. Give them a couple cross cuts there. And this, if this was really stale, I would cut this a little longer and a little thinner and smaller. But see, that's still not real hard, so we're going to be okay using that roll. Let's put another one in there, a half of one anyway. Now, we've got our bread cut, and that's the basis for this because we want this bread when it's inside that chop as the chop itself roasts. We want this to suck up as much of the juice from the pork chop as we can. All right, we're going to trim up some onion because, as I told you, this is going to be surrounded by the meat. We want to have a little flavor to it, and the onion will not overpower the pork roast because that's what we're making. We're making a miniature of a stuffed pork roast. And these are great to do. You can set them up ahead of time for the freezer. Once we have our onion set, we didn't cut all the way through it, and I'm not going to cut all the way through it again. Remember, I'm after very small stuff here. We're looking real tiny. For a regular going into a turkey or anything, it wouldn't matter. But for this, we want these cut small, and that's what we're after. So I've cut that. You see, it still doesn't come apart. And then we cut the other way, and that's going to give us very small onion. And that's what we're after. All right, so that goes into the bowl. And then the seasoning for this is the same as a basic stuffing. And a basic stuffing that would go into a turkey would have some garlic. We could put black pepper in here today because it's not a light-colored food and it's not going to be on the outside. So we put pepper in there, and it's very easy to see the amount of pepper you're adding with the black pepper and some salt. And then I'm going to put in here a little rubbed sage. Now, if you don't have rubbed sage, ground sage is fine. Poultry seasoning will do just well. I'm only putting in, for those two pork chops, about 1/4 teaspoon. All right. Now, with those seasonings in there, Want to add a little bit of celery. That's going to give us just a little bit of crunch. But again, that has to be very, very small. So we'll put that out of the way. Cut the end off of here. And whenever you're going to cut anything small, what you want to remember is to make long cuts first. So our celery gets cut long ways, like that, and like that. And that's going to give your stuffing a little texture. And we just cut those ends like that. 2 of those will be enough. And then we're going to take that and cut that very fine and very small. Cooking time, in case I forget to tell you later on, cooking time on the stuffed pork chop is approximately 40 minutes. So these take a little while in the oven. There we go. That goes in there. Now with all those ingredients in there, all we're going to do now is moisten this with a little water. And we just mix that around. And since the bread was not quite stale, it won't take long to do. If it's stale bread, you would pour that on there and let that set for a minute. And once that has absorbed all the water, we're in business. So there we go. And that is a very basic stuffing. And that stuffing is good for any kind of meat or poultry. Now, how do you get that into the pork chop? Very simple. I'm going to put them over here. And then we're going to take that little pocket that we cut into the pork chop, and we're going to fill that with a pastry bag. Now, if you don't have a pastry bag, get one, because if you're going to do a stuffed pork chop, and they're going to be as good as the ones we're showing you here, they're going to be very popular. So we take that, we close the end of the pastry bag, and that stuffing is going to just come right out of there. So we just put that into the end of the pork chop, and we force that in there, and then we just give that a squeeze on the pastry bag, and that's going to put the stuffing right in there. And you can see that bulging up as it goes. There we go. And we'll push out any excess water. There we go. And now we have a pork chop that's stuffed, and that's plumped up very nice. And you'll feel that. It's got a nice big pocket of stuffing in there, and that's what we're after. And now what I'm going to do is we're going to take a fry pan, and we're going to spray that. Now, if you're doing large amounts, then you would put these in a roast pan, and you would line them all up in your roast pan. You put your chop right there, and look at the end of this. If we can get you to take a peek, you see where we stuffed that? You just poke that right back in there, and that end is not going to open up, and that stuffing is not going to leak out of there. So we got a pork chop with just that little tiny mark on it, and the rest of that's full of our stuffing. So we got the one stuffed, and we're going to stuff this second one. And again, we just find the little hole that we cut in the pork chop, and we insert our pastry bag in there as far as it'll go, and then we force our stuffing in there. And the pork chop will just bulge right out, and then it'll be hard to squeeze, and that way you know the pork chop is full. So we take that nice full pork chop, and we put them on a pan, and then we're going to take the top of the pork chops, as I wipe up here a little bit, and we're going to lightly season them with a little bit of pepper and a little salt. And they go into the oven, and we let them bake. If you're going into a regular oven, our oven here has a fan, but if you're cooking in a regular oven at home, you would cook these off at about 350 degrees, and that would take a half hour to 40 minutes. If you have a lot of pork chops, the time would still be the same, provided you didn't crowd them all together too much. So they're going into the oven for approximately a half hour. We're going to let you watch a commercial. When you come back, we'll show you how to set up some buttered noodles and a nice sauce to go with them. So I'll see you in a few minutes.
If it's going to happen for you, it's because you make it happen.
Can I see Latin lunch?
Bring it up.
That means college and paying tuition.
Bandit.
The answer could be an Air Force ROTC scholarship.
How many F-16s you bringing in, Major?
You'll get an education and the training to become an Air Force officer.
Yeah, man. Radio check. 1, 2, 3, 3, 2, 1. Okay, 2 F-16s to hot 6. Right on position and hold. Let me take a look at this guy.
Right that tower, airback 666, 7 miles northeast with the cardiac.
Roger, Ronan, thanks. Hold those 2 F-16s short.
Send the F-15 around.
Switch to ILS. In-flight emergency, Aerovac 666 on the ground in 7 minutes with cardiac patient.
Airbags 2 miles out.
With an Air Force ROTC scholarship, you can go as far as your talent and drive take you.
They'll be all right. They're down now.
Aim high, Air Force.
Well, we've got our pork chops in the oven, and the magic of television is just wonderful. I have a pair of chops that were prepared earlier because the time on the chops, as I told you, is a little over a half hour. So around 40 minutes for the chops. So I've got a pair in there that are just about done, and we're going to show you, we're going to serve them with a buttered noodle, and we're going to make a sauce. So what I have here for the buttered noodle, or for any pasta you want to have, is some boiling water. Wait for the water to come to a good boil, then add some salt to it. And once it returns to the boil again, then we add the pasta. Well, we got to add all of it. There we go. Now, once you have that added, you give that a stir, and we wait for that to return to the boil again. If you're going to be preparing pasta during the summertime, and even if you're going to be making it for macaroni salad, the kitchen can get awful hot. So a little tip that we have for you is, as this begins to boil like it is right now, we're going to give that one more stir, and then we're going to cover that pasta, and it comes off of the fire, just like that. It's covered. Bring it to a boil, stir it, and cover it. That will finish all by itself, and if you are running one burner, your kitchen's going to be a lot cooler, and there's no sense letting that pasta boil away if you don't need it. You've got plenty of heat in that boiling water. That pasta's going to cook just fine. Now, I'd like to set up a nice sauce for this. I'm going to scoop a little butter out of here for the noodles first, though, and I'm going to put that right in that pan because we're going to dry the noodles off after I drain them in this saute pan here. So while I'm using it for a lid, it's also going to melt the butter. Then into a small saucepan, we're going to add a little bit of butter, or any kind of oil you can use. You'll get a real nice flavor out of the butter. And we're going to melt that in the bottom of the pan. Put that up just a little bit. There we go. And stir that around till it's completely melted. Then what I want you to do is we're going to add a little flour to that. And we're going to add just enough flour into this pot to absorb the butter. So that's why I want to make sure that this butter's melted first. There we go. All right, so that's been melted. Now I'm going to take and I'm going to add some flour to that. I know right now you're saying, what kind of flour? I have a mixture today of regular flour and a little whole wheat flour. You can substitute up to half with whole wheat flour if you want for making a roux or a thickener like this. All right, now I've added the flour to that, and I'm going to take this over so you can take a look at what I've got in there. That is the consistency that you want your roux to have, and that's what that is. That's a thickener for a gravy, okay? Should look like wet sand. And you want to let that cook a minute or two. If you've never made a roux, you'll notice a couple of things. First of all, it looks like wet sand, and as it begins to bubble to the bottom of the pan, you're going to let that cook. That's going to fry the flour. If you were to just put that into your sauce to thicken it, it would never boil. It would never go hotter than a boiling temperature, which is 212. Here we're frying it over 400. Now we're going to take, and instead of waiting and trying to make a stock for that, we're going to add a little bit of water and a little bit of chicken base. Now what this is kind of like a bouillon cube without all the salt. The better the base, the less salt it's going to have. So that's called a chicken base, and that's what we're using there. Got our roux stirred up. Now we're going to stir that right into there. And then we're going to just add our stock to that thickener. And we're going to stir that around real good because we want to make sure that we have all the roux dissolved. And that will get very thin at first, and then as it begins to return to the boiling point, it's going to thicken back up. And once it does that, then we can check it for seasoning. And this method that we've just shown you is the same for any kind of gravy. Now, you'll see as I stir this around, it's kind of cloudy, and that's all that's happened to it. It'll get a cloudy look to it. I'll give you a good shot right in the light. And it's very thin. Now, as quickly as I'm showing you that, that is going to begin, as it comes up to a boil, the roux is going to absorb the stock, that chicken stock that we've added, and it's going to thicken that right up. And then we'll have our sauce. Now, while that's happening, we're going to take a peek at our noodles. So I'm going to remove our lid, which is going to be the fry pan for the butter. And you'll see that the noodles are cooked and they're ready to be strained. So we give them a stir. We loosen them all up. And then I'm going to just drain the water off of these noodles. So they're going to come right here to me, and we drain them. And now we have those drained. I'll put the pot out of the way. And then we, right into our butter that we used for the lid, just like that. Now we go back to the sauce, and that's thickening very nicely. So for a little pot of sauce that's going to make you maybe a half a quart of gravy, you're only going to use about a tablespoon of butter. And that should make you a nice velvety sauce. So we've got that. Now I'm going to see how we are for taste on that, and that's going to tell me whether we're going to need any salt or pepper or anything else in that. That's pretty good. If you have a good base, most of the time, that's all you're going to need. Just a base, put in there with your butter and your flour cooked up real nice. And I want to show you what this sauce looks like. Probably on the back of the spoon will give you a real good view of it. If we were serving this even over chicken, this would be very nice. This sauce got that little bit of whole wheat. It's got a nice color in the yellow of the sauce. So it's got a different kind of a look to it. And it should have a nice shine to it. It should have a good shine, a satiny look to it. So once that sauce boils, as this one has, it's ready. Now I've put the noodles in the butter back over the fire because what I want to do is I want to coat the noodles. I want to make sure they're nice and hot. And I also want to make sure that I have all the water out of the noodles. So any water that was inside the noodle is going to be cooked away from the hot butter. Now I'm going to head over there and pick up my pork chop. I'll need that, and I'll need this. And you'll see that these two chops were the shoulder chops, also from a center cut. Get a good hold of them. There we go. For a small amount, a little fry pan is nice. It's really easy to maneuver, and they're bubbling away. And what I'm going to do is I think I can set them right here. You can see how the stuffing has done nothing but bulge out of there a little bit. We got a little bulge on the stuffing, but it didn't come out of the chop. And the chop's got this very nice full look to it. And that's what we're after, a nice full pork chop. You can see that how, there we go, nice and full. And that's going to, one of those is usually enough. So they make a real nice dinner. If you're currently using 2 or 3 chops per person, if the people you're feeding are big people, you can probably get away with one of these double cut chops. So you're going to actually cut down the amount of meat that you're using by making that stuffed pork chop. And the way that we want to do this is over these very dry noodles. You'll see they're just all coated real nice. There's no water floating around, and that's going to just keep those noodles very nice. And that's one way, commercially, we have noodles ready. They'll be cooked off. What we do is, once they're cooked and cooled, we dip them back into boiling water, and then we saute the noodles in a little bit of butter, just like I showed you here, and that gives you a nice, dry, but a hot buttered noodle, and that is the way to have them ready. So people say, gee, how can you get all this stuff ready all at one time? You can have the noodle done and cooled off if you're waiting on company. And the pork chops themselves are very nice because this pork chop will wait for you in the oven. If you have them in the roast pan, a lot of them, and they're done, you can just cover them over with the aluminum foil, and they'll keep very, very nicely. And they'll wait up to an hour. You can hold them in your oven, just shut the oven off, and they will stay hot. As a matter of fact, letting them rest right after they're baked is going to allow the juices to go right back out into the pork chop again. And you'll find that it's going to be not only very tender, but very juicy as well. And then we're going to coat our chop. This is another one of our one dish meals. It's not a one pan meal, but it's one that we serve on one dish, and it's got everything together. And if you're entertaining, you can bring a bunch of these platters right to the table. This is also very nice to serve as a platter, a large platter of noodles, and then the chops on top, and you cover them over with the sauce. So we've shown you how to take a double cut pork chop, cut the pockets in them, and then you make a regular stuffing. You can either cook them directly as we have here, or once you stuff the pork chop and cook it, you can now take that pork chop, wrap it up, and put it in the freezer, and they will microwave very, very well. But we recommend that you roast them first, then cool them and freeze them. And then all you're doing with the microwave is reheating them in a saran wrap, and they will come up just about as juicy as they are today. So this is an item that you can prepare ahead of time. It's one that you can freeze and microwave, and it's one that lends itself well, whether it's one or two of you at home or quite a few of you at home. So when you're going to make something different, remember what we taught you today. Stuff a pork chop. Thanks for watching.